The wrestling world just exploded and nobody saw this coming. Paul Heyman, the master manipulator himself, has fired back at Dean Ambrose's shocking warning message just 5 minutes ago, and what he said is going to change everything we thought we knew about this brewing conflict. If you thought the tension couldn't get any higher between these two, you're about to be proven dead wrong. Before we dive into the chaos that just unfolded, make sure you hit that subscribe button because you're not going to want to miss a single update on this developing situation. Dean Ambrose threw down the gauntlet earlier today with a message that sent shockwaves through every corner of the wrestling community. The lunatic fringe made it crystal clear that Paul Heyman's days of pulling strings and manipulating situations from behind the scenes are numbered. Ambrose didn't hold back, calling out Heyman for years of calculated schemes and promising that a reckoning was coming whether the wise man was ready for it or not. The intensity in Ambrose's voice left no room for doubt that this was personal, that this went beyond business and deep into territory where old wounds never really healed. What made Ambrose's warning particularly chilling was the specific nature of his call-out. He referenced moments that only someone who had been close to Heyman would know about, incidents from their shared history that most fans had forgotten or never even knew existed. Ambrose painted a picture of a man who had watched Heyman operate from the inside, who understood every trick in his playbook, and who was now ready to use that knowledge against him. The message wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war from someone who knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. Paul Heyman's response came faster than anyone anticipated, and the speed of his reply tells you everything you need to know about how seriously he's taking this situation. The advocate wasted no time in addressing every single point that Ambrose raised, but he did it in a way that only Paul Heyman can. Instead of defensive posturing or dismissive rhetoric, Heyman went on the offensive with surgical precision. He acknowledged the history between them but twisted it into something that put Ambrose in an entirely different light, suggesting that the real story was far more complicated than the narrative Ambrose was trying to sell. Heyman began his response by reminding everyone exactly who he is and what he represents in this industry. He spoke about decades of shaping careers, of taking raw talent and turning it into legendary status, and he made sure to emphasize that Dean Ambrose himself was once a beneficiary of that guidance. The implication was clear without being explicitly stated. Heyman was suggesting that whatever success Ambrose achieved during their time working together wasn't purely because of the lunatic fringe's own abilities but because of the strategic positioning and opportunities that came from being associated with the Heyman brand. The most devastating part of Heyman's response came when he started addressing the specific incidents that Ambrose had referenced. Rather than deny or defend his actions, Heyman owned them completely but reframed them as necessary moves in a business where survival depends on staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He described the wrestling industry as a battlefield where sentimentality gets you buried and loyalty is a luxury that few can afford. Every decision he made, every manipulation he orchestrated, was presented as simply doing what needed to be done to protect his interests and the interests of those he represented at the time. Heyman then shifted gears and started picking apart Ambrose's current position. He questioned why someone who claims to be his own man, who prides himself on being unpredictable and uncontrollable, would spend so much time and energy focused on past grievances. The wise man suggested that perhaps Ambrose's obsession with calling him out revealed something deeper, a need for validation or perhaps an inability to move forward without having someone to blame for whatever shortcomings exist in his current career trajectory. It was psychological warfare at its finest, turning Ambrose's attack into a mirror that reflected potential insecurities back at him. What really caught everyone off guard was when Heyman brought up names that nobody expected to hear in this context. He referenced other wrestlers who had similar relationships with him over the years, some who left on bad terms and others who maintained respect despite going separate ways. By drawing these comparisons, Heyman was subtly suggesting that Ambrose's issues might be more about Ambrose himself than about anything Heyman actually did. It was a masterclass in deflection that still managed to land direct hits on his opponent's credibility. The tone of Heyman's response oscillated between dismissive amusement and genuine warning. There were moments when he seemed to be entertained by Ambrose's bravado, treating it like the tantrum of someone who doesn't understand how the real game is played. But then there were other moments when his voice dropped and the entertainment vanished, replaced by something much more dangerous. In those moments, Heyman made it clear that while he might find Ambrose's posturing amusing, he's not someone who takes actual threats lightly and he has no intention of being caught unprepared. Heyman also addressed the elephant in the room, the current landscape of professional wrestling and where both he and Ambrose fit into it. He painted a picture of an industry that's evolved considerably since their paths last crossed in any meaningful way. He positioned himself as someone who has continued to adapt and thrive, maintaining relevance and influence regardless of what company he's working with or which talent he's representing. The unspoken question hanging in the air was whether Ambrose could say the same thing about his own career trajectory. The response took an interesting turn when Heyman started talking about legacy and what both men will be remembered for when their careers are finally over. He spoke about being synonymous with some of the greatest moments in careers in wrestling history, about being the advocate for the conqueror who broke the streak, about managing champions and creating moments that will be discussed for generations. Then he posed a question directly to Ambrose about what his legacy would be beyond being the wild card who could never quite channel his chaos into sustained dominance at the very top of the industry. Heyman's words became even more pointed when he addressed Ambrose's claim about knowing all his tricks and being able to counter them. The wise man actually laughed at this notion, suggesting that what Ambrose knew was only what he had been allowed to see, that there were layers upon layers to his strategic thinking that someone like Ambrose never had access to. He compared it to thinking you understand how a magic trick works because you saw it performed once from the audience, never realizing that the real secret happens long before the magician ever steps on stage. The most chilling part of Heyman's entire response came near the end when he stopped talking about the past and started talking about the future. He made it abundantly clear that if Ambrose wants this confrontation, if he truly wants to test himself against the wise man, then Paul Heyman is more than happy to engage. But he issued his own warning in return, reminding Ambrose that Paul Heyman doesn't step into any situation without knowing all the angles, without having contingency plans for the contingency plans, and without being absolutely certain that he can control the outcome. Heyman brought up the concept of consequences, emphasizing that every action in this business creates ripples that extend far beyond the immediate moment. He suggested that Ambrose might think he's prepared for whatever comes next, but preparation and actual readiness are two entirely different things. The implication was that Ambrose was walking into a situation that he didn't fully understand, challenging someone whose influence and connections run deeper than any outsider could possibly comprehend. What made Heyman's response so effective wasn't just what he said but how he said it. There was no panic, no desperation, no sense that he felt threatened by Ambrose's warnings. Instead, there was the confidence of someone who has been in these situations countless times before and emerged victorious every single time. He spoke with the authority of someone who knows that when the dust settles, people will remember who was standing tall and who was left trying to explain what went wrong. Heyman also made sure to acknowledge that Dean Ambrose is dangerous, that his unpredictability and willingness to embrace chaos make him a legitimate threat that shouldn't be underestimated. But in the same breath, he pointed out that chaos without direction is just noise, and that in a battle between calculated strategy and wild unpredictability, history has shown time and again which approach tends to prevail. He was giving Ambrose credit while simultaneously explaining why that credit wouldn't be enough to change the ultimate outcome. The response concluded with Heyman extending what could only be described as an invitation wrapped in a threat. He told Ambrose that if he truly wants this confrontation, if he's genuinely ready to face the consequences of calling out Paul Heyman publicly, then the wise man would be happy to provide him with that opportunity. But he made sure Ambrose understood that once this door is opened, there's no closing it again, that whatever happens next will have ramifications that extend far beyond just the two of them. What happens next is anyone's guess, but one thing is absolutely certain. The wrestling world is about to witness something special, something that has been building for years beneath the surface and is now ready to explode into public view. Paul Heyman and Dean Ambrose are on a collision course that cannot be avoided, and when these two finally come face to face, the aftermath is going to reshape everything we think we know about both of them. The response from Paul Heyman has done exactly what he intended it to do. It shifted the narrative, created doubt where Ambrose was trying to establish certainty, and reminded everyone watching that challenging the wise man is very different from actually defeating him. Ambrose threw the first punch with his warning message, but Heyman's response has made it clear that this fight is going to be far more complicated than the lunatic fringe might have anticipated. Social media has absolutely exploded in the minutes since Heyman's response went public. Fans are divided between those who think Ambrose has finally met his match in terms of mind games and those who believe the lunatic fringe is exactly the kind of unpredictable force that could throw all of Heyman's careful planning into chaos. Wrestling analysts are scrambling to break down every word of both the warning and the response, trying to read between the lines and predict what moves each man might make next. The timing of all this is particularly interesting given the current state of the wrestling industry. With so many things in flux and so many opportunities for unexpected alliances or betrayals, the Heyman vs. Ambrose situation adds another layer of intrigue to an already complex landscape. Other wrestlers are surely watching this unfold and calculating how it might affect their own positions, their own opportunities, and their own potential conflicts or partnerships. What makes this entire situation so compelling is that both men have legitimate claims to being right in their own way. Ambrose has every reason to feel aggrieved by certain aspects of his history with Heyman, and his warning was coming from a place of genuine conviction. But Heyman's response demonstrates that he too has valid perspectives on what happened between them, and his framing of events presents a version of history that's equally defensible depending on how you choose to interpret the actions and motivations involved. The wrestling community is now waiting with anticipation to see how Ambrose responds to Heyman's response. Will he double down on his accusations and escalate the situation even further, or will he adjust his approach based on how Heyman has repositioned the narrative? The next move belongs to the lunatic fringe, and everyone knows that predicting what Dean Ambrose will do next is almost impossible because that unpredictability is his greatest weapon. Whatever happens from here, one thing is guaranteed. This situation is far from over and the best moments are still to come. The war of words between Paul Heyman and Dean Ambrose has only just begun, and when these two masters of psychological warfare fully commit to destroying each other, the entire industry is going to feel the impact. Stay tuned because this story is developing by the minute and you're not going to want to miss what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed so you catch every single update as this incredible situation